Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Fintech Fridays. I'm Brian View, President, Chief Operating Officer of FinLocker, and joining me is Allie Carty. Allie, welcome to my humble little podcast.
Thank you, Brian. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad we connected. So I want to get into kind of all kinds of stuff about how we connected on through social media, and then some of the things you're doing that are awesome in that space. But before we do that, let's let you introduce yourself, tell the audience kind of who you are, who you're with, how you got into this crazy mortgage, industry, and tell us a little bit about Active Comply and all the great things you guys are doing to help your clients in the industry.
100%. So I think you and I first met over LinkedIn, and we had kind of connected. I think we're on a similar path of, just bringing the American dream to more people.
Right.
So a little bit about me. I grew up in a mortgage household. My mom always told me I was going to be second generation girl banker. And as a 6, 7-year-old, I didn't really know what that meant. So growing up, I always heard FHA, non-QM, like all these different terminologies. And I just chose, that's not for me. I was 10 through 2008. So I remember just the cyclical feeling of like budgeting and, having to save. That was something that I didn't know I wanted in a career. But I always kept it back of my mind. And so I went to Florida State. I got the opportunity to be a part of the sales team there. Go Noles. Yes. And so through the sales team, they really just sparked this interest in me to maybe not have that typical 9-to-5, have the ability to connect with people, add value. And I didn't know what I wanted to sell yet, but I knew that I wanted to be able to help people and talk to people a lot. I'm the person in the elevator that is like, oh, nice shoes, like just small talk. I work from home right now, and that's something that I go get lunch, So I knew that I wanted to have a non-9-to-5 conversational job. And as I graduated, company Oracle recruited me through our career fair. And so I went and worked for Oracle for a couple months. I had a company that Dell recruited me and asked me to move to Nashville, work in person. I really liked that idea. So I moved to Nashville, and a couple months into the job, Blake Boss, who is with Active Comply, he's very well known on LinkedIn. He reached out to me and was like, hey, our parents work together at an IMB in Florida. And so he said, hey, I know your mom has mortgage experience. Would you come work for Active Comply? And I was like, no way. Like, that's just not for me. Like, all you, but not me. And he was like, well, just come to a conference. We'll fly down. We'll make it worth your while. I just want to see if you'd like it. And I'm like, all right. So I fly down to Miami. It's a really fun experience. It is that face-to-face interaction that the virtual atmosphere has kind of taken away.
Yep.
And I just loved it. So I joined Active Comply in June, and I've just been kind of trucking along. It's been really fun to learn not only the industry, but more about social media. Because personally, I have a pretty large following on Instagram and different social platforms. So it's always been something that I have found a passion in, is like just studying marketing, the psychology behind why people engage with certain people on social media and influencers, finfluencers.
Yeah.
And so I kind of have just found my niche here in the mortgage industry. I've felt so fortunate. I think I've gone to 12 different conferences since joining Active Comply.
Isn't that crazy?
And I just think I feel so grateful. It's very rare to be at a conference and people be the same age as me. And I think that there's such a niche as I've gone through these conferences, marketing the Gen Z, how to reach Gen Z. There's been so many sessions that I've sat through, and I'm like looking around the room, and it's like all of these parents, like my mom's age, and they're talking about their kids, and they're like, well, my kid thinks this, and my nephew does this. And I'm looking around, I'm like, I am 24, I can kind of vouch for my friends and my age group. So it's been really fun to learn about. And I think this influencer thing on LinkedIn, that's kind of how you and I first got engaged over like socials. I don't think we've actually ever met in person.
No, we missed each other at a recent series of conferences that your team kind of divided and conquered, and you went to San Diego. I was in the other conference in Vegas. So, but I'm sure it'll be, you know, one of the upcoming events we'll get to finally meet virtually, which will be cool. Not 100%. Virtually, live, I should say.
Well, in person, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. I don't even know what virtual versus live versus in person means anymore.
I will say video content makes some people feel that way.
Yeah.
I was on a Zoom yesterday, and I'm going to a conference later this month, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to meet all you guys and actually be able to put a face to a name. It'll be nice. So
I want to unpack a couple things that you covered. And one thing that struck me was at Florida State, you talked about the sales team. Can you maybe go into a little bit of that? Because I'm familiar with maybe a similar program at Michigan State. You can see Michigan State over my shoulder.
So Florida State, Blake Boss also was a part of the sales team. I was a marketing major, and I was kind of really struggling to find my passion. I think growing up, my mom being in the mortgage industry, she's always had a really big why behind her job. For instance, we were on some very nice vacation in the Virgin Islands, and she was up at 2 a.m. on the deck of the boat because someone was at the closing table in Florida and they couldn't close on their home. And I was like, Mom, you're on vacation. And she was like, Allie, I get to do this. She's like, this is something that I want to do. And I really took that with me as I started evaluating different companies and working with the sales. Being a marketing major, I was like, I'm not passionate about this. You know, I don't feel like I wake up every morning and think I get to do a career like this. So I found the sales program, and it just got my brain juices flowing. It got me so excited. Our sales professor, the first class really just helped you figure out if this is something for you. And it made you really uncomfortable. You had to do a 1-minute elevator speech.
Yeah.
You had to build a resume, build a LinkedIn, give out 10 business cards at a networking event. It was just those types of instances where I remember being so scared to go into those different types of testing environments. And they made me so much better on the back end. So the sales program is something that competes nationally now. And Michigan State, I think, is one of the other schools that competes nationally.
Yeah.
And you just do role plays. You know, you do the whole spin selling. I don't know. My mom always calls it Dennis Black training, where like you do a training and you sit down and you build rapport, you know, do the whole sales cycle. And it got me so excited. It was like, this is something that I could see myself doing every day. And so I always like to highlight it. Are you familiar with the sales program, or just the idea of?
I'm familiar through my one of my sons. He's 27. His college roommate at Michigan State was part of the very first team that Michigan State kind of stood up. And so, and I'm a Michigan State alum. So I'm like, man, how cool would it have been way back when in the 90s or late 80s, you know, if this would have been available to someone like me. And so it's what I love about it is it's teaching real life applications, right? It's not textbook learnings. Sadly, most of what you learn in college, textbook stuff, you're never going to use. But this is like a real life application on how do you engage at a conference where you walk in and you don't know anybody in the room. What do you do? Yeah, I love it. So cool.
So it's been really cool. And I think I actually recently got awarded the Diversity and Inclusion Scholarship through the MBA.
Oh, awesome.
It's something I really want to do is further my education. And as I've been thinking about, like, I'm so thankful for my ability to have a higher education, but I still have this drive to want to be curious and learn more, especially about our industry. And I remember when I graduated or earned my stripes from the sales program, they were like, never stop learning, never stop being genuinely curious about everything in our world. And that's really what I feel like fueled my want to further my education in the mortgage industry, is really that mindset that they give us in a program like that.
Yeah.
And, you know, geometry. I couldn't tell you like anything that I took from that class, but an elevator speech. I'll get in an elevator with someone who I've done a lot of research on, and I want to ask them about something because of a program like that.
I love it. I think it's so cool. So let's talk a little bit about Active Comply. And I'm familiar with your company and how you help folks in the industry kind of stay in the guardrails of compliance as it relates to social media. But maybe just share, quickly kind of, your elevator pitch on all things Active Comply. Because one of the things I try to do on this podcast is learn myself, but also educate our audience on some cool companies and products and platforms that are out there. So this is your opportunity to shine.
Awesome. Thank you. So I think really the why behind Active Comply is to help these lending institutions reach maybe untouched borrowers or prospective clients that may not feel capable to buy a home or may not even think about it. So I think that that's what really intrigued me with the company is we're able to reach a whole different group of individuals through a platform like social media. So while we sell a solution that helps compliance and the social media aspect, because compliance cannot always be fun to talk about, but you have to have it. Otherwise, these institutions fall apart. And I think Active Comply gives IMBs, banks, credit unions the ability to use social media compliantly with a peace of mind. And it also gives their loan officers the freedom to also build like their own brand, to reach that next gen home buyer and be present. Because I don't know if you've done any research on some of the influencers, but there are people who are generating opportunity, and the IMBs and the credit unions and the banks that aren't allowing social media are going to miss out on that untouched opportunity that comes from individuals who may not use social media. Like it's a free platform for education, for a lot of things, but also education. And so maybe some of those underserved communities who don't have the ability to get higher education or, have conversations around homeownership, Active Comply gives companies the ability to touch those types of opportunities and talk about homeownership. So that's what really encourages me. Our system uses consumer access data to automatically monitor loan officers, licensed individuals, to make sure that they are staying within those guardrails, like you said.
Yeah, I think the way I think about it is, a one-off loan officer or professional who's doing their thing on social media and maybe doing a great job is one thing. But if you're an institution with 50, 100, 200, 1,000, 2,000 individual professionals, you want to encourage, right? You want to encourage them promoting their own personal brand and by extension, the company brand. But you have to stay in the guardrails. And so you essentially allow kind of this hyper local social media strategy at scale with the guardrails in place. And I think it's so important. And
it's also honestly, really good for recruiting.
Yeah.
So those loan officers, they may be at an institution that doesn't allow social media. Yeah. So I feel like other employers who want top talent, they're going to say, hey, we'll invest in this monitoring solution just so we can have that high producer who is reaching that untouched market that is that next generation of home buyers. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's
no. That was perfect.
I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I think look at social media is not going away. It's not a fad. And what you're doing, which is how we kind of got introduced to each other. That's where I want to go next. What you've been doing kind of as a personal pet project, right, is kind of interviewing and educating that next generation home buyer. And this is something that it's become kind of a recent interest to me, and maybe even a recent passion, just to understand the reach and the scope of social media and helping build financial fitness, financial literacy, financial education specific to home buying. And so let's talk a little bit about kind of these, I'm assuming they're Saturday morning, walks in the park with Allie, so to speak, where you're doing these kind of interviews, asking next generation home buyers kind of what their thoughts are on all things, home ownership. How did that 100%. Start?
So MBA IMB back in January, I remember sitting through a session, and some of the most influential people in our industry, in my mind, were talking about social media, TikTok, things that I really cared about. but also just like I wrote down some statistics today. It was the average loan officer age is 46.
Yeah.
And it's down from 53, which is awesome. But, I think the younger loan officers are starting to use social media, and NFM Lending presented some data on their influencers. And I was just like, this is brilliant. Like, there are so many people out there in my life who use TikTok for all their purchases. If they don't maybe want to buy a home through TikTok, they at least get thoughts about it based on influencers in the business. So I just kind of sat there in the room and I raised my hand and I said, hey, I'm a 24-year-old. This is spot on. I think whatever they're doing here is brilliant. And so after people came up and they were like, what do you mean? Like, you're 24, like, let's talk about it. Like, what do you guys do? And so I just saw this avenue. I know Kristen Messerly does great things with millennials and Gen Z, and her data is fantastic. And I just really wanted to take the opportunity to have discussions with the people in my life about what they're actually thinking, because that's what these conferences are speculating about. So I I was talking to KP at the conference, and I said, how do I plan this? And he's like, you don't. He's like, you just jump into it. Yeah. And I was like, no, like, I'm a young 24-year-old. People aren't going to take me seriously. He's like, Allie, he's like, just talk about it. And so that conversation kind of just spurred this video series that I've become super passionate about, like you said. And I think the American dream, I was listening to a podcast about this SVB collapse, and an economist, yes, was speaking about the importance, especially right now, of ownership and just trying to have as many assets and property rights, because that's really how you express your freedom. And, I'm not going to get into politics, but it just reminded me, our generation, I don't want us to miss out on that.
Right.
And as I've done these surveys, where I've really wanted to partner with you in a series like this, is education is so missed. And one thing about my friends is we're also really prideful. Yeah. So it's like, unless someone sparks up the conversation, they aren't going to come forward and say, hey, teach me about this. For instance, I think I was talking with Raquel Boris about this, but I have a friend in my life. I was over having dinner, and her boyfriend calls her, and he's moving to Nashville in a couple weeks. And he was like, oh, I got us a realtor. And I was like, what? Lightning bolt. And I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, well, when I move there, we're going to eventually want to buy a home. And so I got a realtor. And I was like, do you realize all of the aspects that go into financing a home? And he's like, Allie, I don't want your mortgage spiel. He's like, I got a realtor. I don't want it. And I'm like sitting there thinking, an app like FinLocker, and this isn't me endorsing you whatsoever. I've had conversations with my mom, and I've been like, this is brilliant, because I did one statistic about it was 31% of my peers would prefer speaking face-to-face with the loan officer. So that sounds kind of contradicting to this whole virtual environment. I thought people would avoid the face-to-face, but where I really think the value in that number comes is 31% want to go talk to someone, but before they have that conversation, they're going to do a lot of independent research.
100%. Yeah.
They're going to use different platforms to figure out what they need when they're ready, so that they don't waste time talking to a loan officer. They're going to say, hey, listen, I know I'm financially ready to do this. Let's have a conversation. And so that's where I've been really just doing this research, having conversations. There's a virtualization to my generation, 100%.
Yeah.
And if there's a solution that can help them to realize their financial readiness, sparked on conversations via social media, influencers, people getting the conversation started, and then going to buy a home, there's a middleman that's missing, and that's the financial readiness and the education. And I think your app has been so fun to click through and learn about. I think just the fact that you have these very straightforward pages about financial readiness and like what goes into it, what it would look like, what to compare rent right now, Yeah. Rent's not going down. So I think it's so cool to learn about. And I'm excited to tell the individual that I talked about earlier in this conversation about your app and just how that would work. But yeah, so it's been really fun to learn about. I think it's really developed a why. Like, my mom wakes up every day and she's like, I get to help people get into a home. I think my why is, I get to help kind of bridge that gap so that my generation doesn't miss out on an opportunity to own property or own a home.
I love it. There's, again, so much to unpack.
I know. Sorry. I went on a huge elevator speech.
These are the best conversations where I just I'm soaking it all in. I want to talk a little bit about the 31% that want that face to face. That's one side of the equation, but there's still 2/3 that have said they don't want it, or it's not their preferred. But in today, anyway, from a regulatory perspective, there's always going to be a loan officer associated, because the regs say there needs to be an NMLS registered person, in the transaction. And I think I understand this, but I'd love to just get your kind of validation. The generation that you're kind of engaged with and learning from, and that you're part of, while private, they want confidence and certainty before they enter into exploring a transaction or a financial relationship, so to speak. Whereas if I think way back when I was buying a home and getting financing, although I was in the industry, I didn't really have a readiness journey or path. It was like, I know we don't want to rent anymore. We're starting a family, so we want to have a home. I guess we'll go apply. I literally remember, even again, being in the industry, applying for a mortgage at my own company, kind of on pins and needles, not knowing that this was a certain, approval. And my sense with your generation is you want that certainty. You don't want to put yourself out there and have that, the answer be no or not now. And so maybe talk about how, and I think that's why there's such a success or energy around the financial literacy, financial education that I'm seeing happening on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and other platforms.
100%. So one of the biggest sessions that I was really encouraged about was a mortgage collaborative conference a couple months ago. And Kristen Messerly was really talking about the importance of trust and just building trust with the buyer so that they feel confident enough to be vulnerable with you about a conversation like financial readiness. As I've had conversations, I have a group of 10 girlfriends here, and they're really just my guinea pigs before I do these surveys. So God bless them. They're amazing. But like, I'll be at a bar on a Friday night, and I'll be like, hey, let's talk home. And they're like, Allie, it's 5 o'clock on Friday. Let's not.
Yeah, right.
But when they do allow me to, pick their brain, I've been like, so what do you guys think goes into buying a home? And I think every single person just talked about the down payment.
Right.
And I'm like, well, do you understand there's so many factors in order to even qualify for having that conversation or giving that money towards a down payment?
Yeah.
So one of the things that, you talked about financial education, I got to do a day on the Hill with the Nashville MBA. And my favorite relationship I made there, there's phenomenal people, but the most eye-opening conversation I had was with someone who works in our housing development and works with first-time home buyers here in Nashville. And I told her about this initiative and how I'm really excited, to kind of just talk about it, get some feelers out there so that we can kind of alleviate the lack of education. And she was telling me about these initiatives that she really wants to be, we had a conversation about the unpractical classes that people take in high school.
Yeah.
And her movement is really working around bringing those financial literacy courses to high schools and just talking more about it because, it sounds like you have kids, and I think that next generation is going to be so lost in a virtual atmosphere if they aren't actually face-to-face at school, at least having conversations about financial readiness. So you mentioned, financial education, financial readiness. If people in high school and have an app like FinLocker and they have their ability to learn about it, it's going to be a much more comfortable conversation and a lot less vulnerability involved when people go to talk about financing a home with a loan officer.
Yeah, imagine. We'll take this all the way back to our opening when we talked about the sales team at Florida State and Michigan State. Imagine if there was a different program or team or club or activity Yeah.
I had to take so many crazy like history classes, art renaissance from 1920,
Yeah.
why aren't we taking classes on how to build your credit, on the different things that go into being financially secure?
Yeah.
My mom, she's going to kill me when I'm sharing this, but I called her the other day because I got a ping alert from my bank that my credit went down or something. And our generation is aware that that is very bad.
Right.
But I didn't really know why. And so in order for me to check it or something, I ended up spending like $200 because I panicked.
Yeah.
And it was like, if I understood what goes into a credit score, why it gets hit, what the different repercussions are, then I wouldn't have spent $200 on figuring out what the alert was. And she was like, Allie. And so talking with the first time home buyer specialist, here in Nashville, she was like, people come to me with money, but they aren't financially ready to buy.
Right.
You have a home affordability page in FinLocker, and you talked about a car payment, credit card minimums, child support. That's something I would never think, I don't have a child, but some people maybe have a child and they don't even, there's different things that go into being able to afford a home. So I thought that was a cool page to look through. And there's a lot of other things. So I think education is huge.
Well, it's what I'm seeing in the kind of loan officer space, which I'm spending a lot of time in that space, is, and probably not shocking, but I think it's eye-opening for people that aren't focused here. The loan officers who we're now calling finfluencers, that are really kind of killing it. They're not just killing it with their followers and the content. There's actually real pipelines behind what they're doing. It's a real business. And so it's bringing this, it's bridging this gap of this huge, immense need that this segment of consumers has and wants, but it's now tying it into a practical business use case. And what you're doing with your pet project, which I love, is helping educate professionals on how they can think about being that conduit of literacy and education to a segment, build trust, as Kristen talked about, build a relationship, move away from being transactional and be more, translational. A friend of mine, Steve Richmond, talks about bringing, transactions and relationships together, kind of forming this translationship approach. And what you're doing is just super helpful there.
Well, thank you. And I think something that I've learned, and one of the speakers at MBA IMB really gave me a good nugget of advice, not one-on-one, but just in a session. And she said, before you can ever ask for business, always build a relationship first, and she said something like send 3 different resources outside of asking for business. And I think right now is a perfect time. Rates may not be amazing. The scarcity around buying a home may be high. But if loan officers are taking the time, your video on the SVB collapse, as a 24-year-old, I read headlines. I'm still learning the industry. I'm not 100% sure what this means, but it also was a call to action, and it was a little bit optimistic. And I think that if loan officers were taking the time to, instead of saying, hey, let me talk to you about buying a home, saying, hey, let me explain this to you. This sounds really scary. I want to make sure you understand what this means. That's going to be the reason that people want to do. And I'm sure that that's just a lot of people know that, and that's a given, but in this type of atmosphere, I think it's really lost and transactional, like you said. So I think loan officers have the power of social media. They can do it from the comfort of their home. I think you were in the car yesterday, and it was like, I watched that whole video because it was like so educational for me. And as I've had conversations with my friends, I have people who text me and they're like, hey, I found a home that I really like. You want to help me finance it? And I'm like, I'm not licensed for that right now. But because I post about it so much and I talk about it as my brand, people come to me in my circle because I'm seen like an expert.
Yeah.
So loan officers who actually have the capability, to talk about it all the time and be like, oh my gosh, did you see this? This is so cool. Their network's going to come to them, So I think that social media is a great way to build that network and just build a relationship.
I love it. Well, we covered a ton of ground.
Sorry,
That's
I
awesome.
get so excited about this stuff.
No, this is super helpful. I am excited for your future. You're one of the bright stars in our industry. I've got more hope for our industry because there's a lot of folks that are in your generation that are coming into this and really, kind of grabbing it by the horn. So thank you for all you're doing. Thanks for joining my little podcast and sharing.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to share it.
We're gonna have you back because if people aren't following you, they need to follow Allie. You're doing some great content, great education. I'm learning every time you put something out there. It's helping me get better. So follow Allie. Check out Active Comply. Come back next Friday for our next episode of FinTech Fridays. Allie, thanks for joining.
Thanks, Brian.